All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I'm joined by Adam Holloway of the Around the Block Falcons podcast. And today we're going to be talking all about the draft and getting you guys geared up for this year's scouting combine, talking about some of the players that can really help themselves in the coming weeks.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, you can find Locked On Falcons available on all the podcast platforms that you listen to, whether it's Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify. And of course, you can also find Locked On Falcons free and available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel and give us a like when you do. Today's episode, I know you guys are tired of hearing me talk about or not talk about the draft. So I brought in somebody that loves talking about the draft. And, you know, we're a week away from the combine where players are going to be working out. And so he's going to come on here, talk a little bit about, you know, what he expects to see next week when all these players get into the so-called underwear Olympics and all these various things. I'm, of course, talking to Adam Holloway. You guys know him on as Damsky32 on Twitter. He's the guy that's doing all the spaces each and every day, trying to talk about edge rushers, trying to talk about defensive backs, but it always boils down to some other tangent conversation that goes off the rails. But Adam, man, welcome back to the show.
What's going on, Aaron? How you doing? Yeah, that's pretty much the synopsis of what happens. I want to talk prospects, and then we ended up in a Bill Belichick kind of like how he crafts his defense last week, and I was like, okay, sure. But yeah, it's fun, man. Aaron, we get you in there too, so that's a good time too. We pulled you out, and you know, we got you to be a little bit more social.
And I hate it. So
bringing out the best in people. That's what I do.
Yeah, man. So we'll start today's conversation talking a little bit about the Falcons and their draft plans. Anybody who's been listening to the podcast the last week or so knows that I have tried to duck this question as much as possible. So we'll get someone on here who doesn't want to duck the question, who embraces this question. So at this point in time, and we have a long way to go in this pre-draft process, where is your head at as far as the Falcons' potential draft plans? And obviously everybody's so focused on what they do at that 8th overall selection. So I'm just here to pick your brain to see where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, it's to be honest with you, talking about like just the first round pick is so exhausting. Like, I feel like every time I post something, it's just like, what are we going to do in the first round? Like, to be honest with you, like, it's just I feel like it's just going to be BPA again. I don't know however they're going to deem that. Me and you have talked about like, DB versus edge versus receiver versus offensive tackle. Like, so many different scenarios. Names I like there are obviously Kyle Hamilton. I don't know. I've heard that the Jets like him, so I don't know if he'll be there. Obviously now with everything coming out with Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, you know, he is raw, but I mean, the athletic traits are there, and you know, he's working with Chuck Smith, so I'm sure that'll be brownie points for Falcons fans. Derek Stingley's always like, I mean, like to me, like if you look at it, Derek Stingley's like the most polarizing prospect, I think, of the group. Like, because if he actually reaches his potential, that's like a Jalen Ramsey type corner. Like he's like that good if you're going based off his freshman year. So he's fun. But then you get into the lesser knowns or like the lesser less SEC guys, like with David Ojabo and George Karlaftis. Where's he? Purdue, right? Is he Purdue? Yeah. And people are like, oh, we don't want him. And then you got your Travon Walkers, which for me, me and you have talked about this. Travon Walker, obviously a Georgia guy, and Dan Brugler like has him at like 5 or 6 in his rankings, and it's I'm just not there. I don't see it. Georgia fans are pressing me in my mentions about it. Like, why am I not high on them? I just think that there's a lot. For me, his film's good. There's a lot more there that needs to be there for me to justify picking him at 8. But like you've said before, like I've said before, I just think we just need to pick a good player. That's why I pitched Treylon Burks in a mock draft and get good feedback on that. Like, to me, I think we just all got to be open. And I think I keep saying, like, let's just get a good player at 8, like a guy that in 5 years we know we have to resign. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's got to be a foundational piece. Yeah, I think any DB or an edge makes sense. Obviously, like if Thibodeau's there for me, regardless of whatever, I don't even know. It seems like every year we pick a prospect and we say, "Oh, that guy doesn't love football," and we just run with that. And I think Thibodeau is this year's that. I would prefer to just, if he wants to play 6 years, I'll take all 6 years of edge. Uh, what do you call it, statistics, since we haven't had them, and roll with it, because 6 years is better than the last 6 years that we've had from the edge group here in Atlanta. And I just want to start building a foundation in that room. But I don't know if those guys are gone, then like, you see what I mean? Like, I'm just going through so many scenarios in my own head right now. It's like, if Thibodeau's there, he's got to be the pick. If Kyle Hamilton's there, he's got to be the pick. So I guess play off that.
Yeah, it's tough because, like, you talk about best player available, but we like have no idea how the Falcons are going to stack their board, because we look at, like, Dane Brugler's top 8 prospects, or Daniel Jeremiah's top 8 prospects, or whoever's top 8 prospects, and we just sort of assume, like, oh, everybody agrees that these are the 8 best players in this draft, and maybe that is the consensus, but the Falcons, could value somebody else a little bit higher in that group than other people sort of value that group. And you talk about the various positions that the Falcons could go, like, a position that doesn't get talked about, I don't think, enough as a possibility. And again, I think this conversation could be heavily impacted by what happens in March, which is part of the issue where I kind of like, it's February, it's hard to sort of glean this stuff, is like linebacker, right? Like,
Yeah.
Devin Lloyd is consistently, put in the top 10 on like everybody's, or not everybody's, but a lot of people's draft reports.
Yeah.
And if the Falcons lose Foye Oluokun and then trade Deion Jones, and all of a sudden linebacker is going to be looking like a glaring need, and you could look at a player like Devin Lloyd, or maybe the Falcons really like Nakobe Dean because of his leadership, and what he does at the combine may elevate his stock, or whatever the case may be. So it's one of those things where it's such a fluid situation, which is part of the reason why I continue to duck the question on the podcast the last couple of weeks, and we'll continue to do so for the next couple of weeks. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
That's a good one. Like, Devin Lloyd, he's actually a guy that I started turning on to now, and like just his ability to like kind of line up everywhere and just give you something from everywhere. And he has a little bit of that leadership qualities too. So I mean, that makes a good sense. But like, then we get into like positional values, and then it's like, do we actually care about positional values? Because we just took a tight end last year. So, and that, if you're going with the consensus of positional value, that didn't make sense last year, regardless of even if Kyle Pitts was an outlier to like every physical standard of a tight end. So I mean, like, so it's like, do we care about positional value? So okay, so then that puts Kyle Hamilton, like, as a top player, or like a Devin Lloyd or Nakobe Dean. So yeah, it's definitely different.
Yeah, I mean, you look at not just the first round pick, you can look at the second round pick, safety, guard in the third round, center in the fourth round, nickel cornerback in the fourth round. So the Falcons clearly went all in on sort of like non-premium
Against the grain
last year. And so does that mean this year they're going to go in on premium positions where they have some needs, like tackle and outside corner and edge rusher, or whatever the case may be? Or again, as you say, it's just hard to figure out what they're doing right now. Like with the Dan Quinn regime, like we kind of knew what their style was. They came from that Seahawks school. But with Terry Fontenot coming from the pro side of the NFL, we were talking about this before we went on air. Like, how much do you glean from that Saints system that he comes from? Because it's like he wasn't really the decider, I guess you could say, in that system. He was part of it, but like, how much is he taking from that? How much are we taking from Baltimore system? How much are we taking from Washington system or whatever, from some of these high up guys in the regime? And, Arthur Smith, how much influence in DP? So it's so unknown at this point in time. It's just hard to figure out what they're going to do.
I think we can both agree, though, that we hope that we take that New Orleans system for that D line, because I know you're the exact same way with me with the edge rushers, that you like these big, strong guys that just collapse pockets. So hopefully we take from New Orleans and a little bit of Washington too, because I know they built some really big guys out there.
Except for one edge rusher in Washington, but we might talk a little bit more about him.
I don't think we've ever gone one-on-one with that combo. We might have to visit that in the spaces one time or something.
All right, so we will continue today's Locked On Falcons, talking more about some of the individual players that can help themselves at the combine next week, as well as some of the drills that Adam and myself will be paying close attention to with some of these different position groups as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, I do want to plug what maybe your second listen should be after you make Locked On Falcons your first listen. And of course, why not check out the Locked On Hawks podcast hosted by Brad Rowland. He's giving you the lowdown on all things for the Atlanta Hawks and their post all-star break, as they make this stretch run potentially to push for a playoff spot. So go check out the Locked On Hawks podcast, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons. So guys, we know as we're talking about, Locked On Hawks in the basketball season in full swing, of course, checking out Locked On Hawks, because basketball as well as college hoops and pro hoops are in full swing. Football season is over, but that doesn't mean that, betonline.net isn't there for all your sports betting needs, whether you're looking for scores, player props, odds, totals, podcasts, and news and more. You can find it all at betonline.net. And it's not just basketball. And of course, we know they'll be there for us when football season is back. But if you want to bet on hockey, boxing, UFC, Olympic coverage, Vegas casino games, betonline.net has it all. So go check them out. Go check out what's the odds for the next year's Super Bowl, and maybe you can make a little bit of money just like myself this past year. So use your mobile device or head to the website at betonline.net today and see all the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So here with Adam Holloway of Around the Block Falcons, and we're talking about the combine now that we've not answered any of the people's questions about what the Falcons will do in the first round. Come back in April. But when we get to the combine next week, what are some of the drills? The combine is sort of this polarizing thing where people say, oh, it's overrated and the testing's overrated. But for you, how do you value the combine as part of your evaluation? Are there certain drills for certain position groups that you look at? Or is this something that you also are in the camp of this doesn't matter nearly as much as people make it out to be?
I think it can confirm things like obviously long speed and the 40 time and like 10-yard splits for like the defensive ends and just ability to get off and stuff. But overall, I'm definitely a film over over shorts Olympics kind of guy. You know what I mean? That's not to say like for me, like I'm a big competitive nature kind of guy. So like all these guys, all these top prospects, they're in one place and they're all vying to be the top at their position, right? So like Thibodeau's fighting with Hutchinson, Stingley's fighting with Sauce Gardner. So like just to see how they answer to a competitive environment and see who has that dog in them. No, but seriously, Mike Mayock always used to say that when he was on, I remember back in the day, just saying like who takes kind of control and has that kind of leadership qualities, because those are kind of things that you can see at the combine as well. These are all gifted athletes. They're all going to run fast. They're always going to lift heavy. They're always going to jump long. Like, you know what I mean? You know what you're going to get. Can you or I see 10 tenths of a second off on film? Not really. It doesn't matter. Like 4.5 to 4.4, you're not really, you know what I mean? You're more than likely not going to see that on film. But if the guy is able to create like separation as a receiver, or if running back can consistently catch, you're going to be able to see those things. But I'm definitely a film guy, but I like to see the nature and the environment, and just to see the persona of each player, and like how they are in an environment where like you're like the biggest thing there is they're competing with one another to be at the tops at each position. Like that I think that's the biggest takeaway from there. And then like obviously for cornerbacks, you want to see long speed, just ability to carry speed downfield. Like I said, edge rushers, the 10-yard split, you want to see that. And three cone, you want to see if they can move laterally just as well as they can in a straight line. So like little things like that. But it wouldn't sway my opinion on a prospect if like a guy that I had ranked in the 6th round, randomly ran a 4.3. Like it really does, you know what I mean? It doesn't do much for me other than, oh wow, he's been working out and he looks great. But yeah, other than that, no, I'm definitely I'll take the film over shorts Olympics.
Yeah, I can't remember who I heard was talking about it. I think it was Daniel Jeremiah, and he was talking about how the combine can sort of help you, where you have these like blocks of players in your sort of rankings or whatever. And you're like, okay, these guys are like day 2 prospects or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of how they test is helping you sort of separate those guys a little bit more, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, all of these guys are like day 2 edges or whatever the case may be, but this guy tested really well. So maybe that pushes him up in round 2. And these other guys that didn't test as well, maybe that means that they're maybe a little bit more the round 3 guys or whatever the case may be. So I think it can create some separation between prospects where, like, right now Hutchinson and Thibodeau are considered to be like the top 2 edges. And so, I think the expectation from a lot of people watching the film is like, oh, Thibodeau is the athlete and Hutchinson's the technician. But if
Mm-hmm.
Hutchinson tests as well as some people, some people I've heard talk about that he will test well, then maybe all of a sudden, because Hutchinson not only has the athleticism and the technique, that creates a little bit of separation
For sure.
between him, and maybe that allows other guys that also test really well, but aren't necessarily the technicians. Maybe that causes them to move up. Guys like a Trayvon Walker or a David Ojabo or whatever the case may be, the guys that are considered a little bit raw to a lot of people's eyes. But it's like, okay, if they test out the gym or whatever the case may be, it's like there's a lot of upside here for these guys. And so I do think, for all these positions, whether we're talking about offense or defense, for a lot of these position groups, I do think some of these metrics do measure out. When you're looking at the 40 time, I think, for wide receivers and cornerbacks, that's real valuable.
Oh yeah,
It
absolutely.
certainly helps with running backs. If you show that, home run hitting speed, that NFL teams are always going to value that at the running back position. I think the agility drills really are important for a lot of position groups. Pretty much every position group outside of maybe quarterback, it has value, particularly for defensive backs and wide receivers, where that change of direction, as well as edge rushers. You mentioned it. It can kind of tell you if those guys have that ability to bend the edge and turn the corner. You look at a player like Tack McKinley, who was really great in 40 time, really great in the explosive drills, but in terms of the agilities and change of direction stuff, was not particularly good. And we know that that wasn't necessarily a strength of Tack, being that sort of pure bendy edge outside guy. So I think there's a lot of value to these things, but I do think in some ways for us on the outside, some of the stuff can get overvalued. And
Yeah.
I know I have a tendency to be like, oh, well, this guy tested poorly, so he's completely off my radar, now moving forward. But
Well, and
you know,
it goes back to like what you were saying about thresholds between the Dan Quinn era. Like if a guy you thought was going to run fast doesn't run fast and doesn't meet that threshold of the Dan Quinn era, then there's no point for you as a Falcons fan to keep looking at that guy, right?
yeah.
And I think as we go on, hopefully we learn what Terry and Kyle Smith's types are, and we can collect data that way and keep going. Because like I thought, like the long arm thing was a thing. Like they want these long arm rushers that are like 265, and that's what they want. But like I look at Dean Pease, like I said, I look at Dean Pease's history, and like that's not always the case. Like these guys are not always like the longest armed, or they're not always the fastest, or they're not even this weight measurement. Like I definitely like there's some like I'll give you an example of a player to a drill that I need to see because there wasn't enough of it on film, and it's Kenneth Walker in the catching drills. There's just not enough reps. He has a couple where he And he's got a couple in the flats, but I want to see if he can run like a wheel consistently, or I want to see if he can run an angle route consistently and catch it and be able to move. Because he's very much in that mold of, like, I'm not saying he's Jonathan Taylor, but he's in that mold that you need to give him like 25 carries, actual carries, handoff carries, for him to be effective. Where I feel like I'm not saying James Cook is on the level of Kenneth Walker. He's not, but James Cook, you can give him 12 carries, and then you can also give him 6 catches, and he can affect you different ways. So if Kenneth Walker can come out and show us, hey, I was just a byproduct of the scheme that I was in. I wasn't asked to catch the ball. Then that can obviously clarify some things. It doesn't all completely not matter, but like for me, I would like to see almost like a high school style one-on-ones. Like, you know what I mean? Like corner versus receiver, light pads kind of stuff. Like nothing too crazy, but I would like to see how they compete. Like I want to see Jameson Williams versus Sauce Gardner, like one-on-one. Let's see who can win on a slant route. Or I want to see Ojabo if he can take a guy like Daniel Falele and put him on his butt, because there's questions about his strength. Like I would almost rather almost like a one-on-ones like in high school. I understand we're not going to get that because there's way more money than high school, like, you know, involved. So but that's kind of where I would want to be. But like hip fluidity in corners, like when they're asking to change directions and track balls, like, yeah, those things make sense for me. But like, I don't know, like it would be so hard for me to like, oh, he had a bad combine, so now he's completely off my board. Like, you know what I mean? When like I've absolutely, like, William Bradley King was a guy last year I absolutely loved. He's like I think he went undrafted last year, and he didn't look good in the combine, but his film showed that he has like a pass rush plan, right? And I was like, man, like I'm not gonna take him off my board just because he had a bad combine. You know what I mean? So yeah, like I definitely there's going to be money to be made, and people are always going to be like, oh my God, he ran a 4.38. And I was expecting him to run a 4.55. Oh my God, we got to push him up our board 20 slots. Like that's, for me, that's not going to do it. I don't know. And I guess that's gotten teams in trouble, right? Like, so I don't know. Maybe I'm just old school.
No, I get it. So on that note, and talking about Kenneth Walker, let's talk about some of those guys that can, you know, help their stock a little bit and get moved up 20 spots on various people's draft boards, at least on the internet. We know teams aren't necessarily doing this, but
they're not listening to us here.
I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah. So we'll get into that as we continue today with Adam Holloway of the Around the Block Falcons, as we talk about more guys that can help their stock at this next week's combine. So continuing our conversation here with Adam Holloway, let's talk a little bit more. You mentioned Kenneth Walker as a guy that could help his stock if he can show some of that pass catching stuff. You know, who are the guys, you know, the anti-cowards like Chase Young and Clavon Chason, who refused to work out at the combine 2 years ago? Who are the guys for you that can really help their stock at the combine? I'll give one example. Like Jordan Davis is a guy that I'm very interested to see.
That's a good one.
Because like we've been hearing for the last year plus that he is this incredible athlete, that he is going to put up like a Dontari Poe like showing as far as this like rare specimen as an athlete at the nose tackle position. And I'm very curious to see if he can live up to that sort of hype. Because you see, when you watch him on film, you see these moments where like his ability to get from point A to point B, when he's like fully engaged and fully going, like you see this incredible burst and speed for a guy as big as he is. So I'm very curious to see if he can sort of live up to the hype. And all of a sudden, the conversation around him goes back to where it was in the middle of the season, where like, oh, he's this rare sort of nose tackle, as opposed to where it is kind of now, where it's not to say that his stock is dropping, but his stock is back where I think most teams sort of value nose tackles, which is a late first, early second round sort of pick. But maybe, you know, Dontari Poe, I think, was the 12th overall pick. And when he came out, 8 years ago or 10 years ago, whenever that was, and maybe all of a sudden Jordan Davis gets back into the conversation of being maybe a potential top 15 or so prospect or whatever the case may be, if he can blow up the combine. So he's a player that I'm very curious to see how he works out.
Yeah, me too. He was going to be one of the guys I was talking about. I think I don't like if he runs a quick 40, like people are just gonna blow their tops on that. I can definitely can see it. I like when you watch his film, like I feel like he's more laterally quick than he is straight line quick. People are gonna take that and be like, oh, he chased down this guy. But I mean, like if you're able to flatten to the play and move laterally really really good, it doesn't necessarily mean you're straight line quick. But yeah, that's pretty big company you're putting him in there. Don Terry Poe is one of my guys, so I don't really I don't know if he's there. I'm curious to see that too. He's definitely polarizing. And like everybody, like in my mentions, just keep going. What about Jordan Davis? Why don't you ever have mock Jordan Davis? And I'm like, I got some bold takes on that, but I'm not going to put them on here because this reaches a lot of Georgia fans. Yeah, so Kenneth Walker was probably my most polarizing one that I wanted to check out. I'm curious for two things. Obviously, the hands I already mentioned, just to see if they're consistent. He's got questions in the pass blocking, but I don't really think we're going to answer those there. I think that's just going to be something that comes over time. And I don't know if that was something that MSU was doing, asking him to consistently chop players when he's like a physical punisher. I don't know why we're asking our guys to do that. But his long speed, you constantly see him pull away from guys. I understand he's in the Big Ten, so the talent's not like super great as opposed to like what SEC corners typically are. I know that goes against everything that I ever said about like saying SEC, Big Ten, and blah blah blah. But it's just like SEC corners are usually the real deal. You can see Kenneth Walker consistently pulling away from secondaries and second level defenders all the time in film, and just his ability to cut and not lose speed laterally as well. So I'm curious to see his 40 time, his 10-yard split. I'm 100% sure is going to be absolutely ridiculous. But another guy I was going to say, George Karlaftis. Like I feel like he's almost the forgotten edge in this group. I feel like he's going to have to, like, I know I said that I don't put too much stock in the combine, but I guess he's going to have to do something crazy there to catch scouts' attention. I just think that there's, I talked about with Jordan Davis, the lateral movement. Like I think people question a little bit George Karlaftis's lateral movement. He's more of like a straight line guy, which means he'll be just scheme dependent to a 4-3 team, which, I mean, in this day and age, you kind of got to be multiple. And if you can only be a one position kind of guy, you're going to get pushed down the board more oftentimes than not. But I think he's going to have to show that he's a little quicker than he was on film. I know people rebuttal me on that, but I don't know, like moving laterally and then just getting washed out of play, it does nothing for me. Like if you can win and go forward, moving laterally, then obviously takes precedence over everything. I can move laterally in a college game and get washed out of play. It doesn't mean I'm good going laterally, right? So I think Karlaftis has to really have a good day. And honestly, I think the expectations for Ojabo to test like a freak is going to be huge for his draft day, because I think a lot of things with him are athletic based, like his potential. So I think he's going to have to test really, really well. I don't expect, if he's long arm, I don't expect him to bench really well, and people are going to take a lot away from that. But naturally, if you're long arm, your bench press is not going to be great anyways. So he's a guy that I kind of have eyes on, that I want to test, and he's kind of like a dark horse for that 8th pick. I just think if we're going to be multiple and moving guys, playing this 3-3-5, playing the 3-4, playing the 4-3 or 3-4 under, and all that stuff, I think Ojabo he's kind of that chess piece you kind of want. I know me and you've been back and forth on this, versus I think you're in the Travon Walker camp and I'm in the Ojabo camp about his fit here. But I think Ojabo makes sense because no disrespect to Steven Means, but Ojabo being back there and being a little bit longer, a little bit more athletic as a dropper in coverage kind of makes sense. So I feel like for who he is as a prospect, Ojabo has to test well and do that. I just talk about edge, but man, that's where I've been like this whole prospect. But I think Kyron Williams as well. He's going to have some the running back out of Notre Dame. He's going to have to test well on his 40. I think that's the big thing with him, is just seeing what his long speed's at. I have no doubt his 10-yard split's going to be good too. He's a quick, shifty back. He's probably the best pass pro running back coming out. So and his third down ability as a catcher as well. Notre Dame kind of used him out wide, so I feel like he's gonna help himself with just showing like nice, smooth, natural hands. Those are a couple of guys. You got a couple more, Aaron, or what's going on?
No, I think you mentioned the edge rushers and talking about, some of the drills to pay attention to earlier, where it's like, I do think the testing matters for the edge rushers because there's a lot of data that basically says like you can, not necessarily with 100% accuracy or anything like that, but generally speaking, the guys that wind up coming to the league at that position and are productive tend to be guys that are very athletic. And so I'm very curious to see how, given how deep this edge rusher class is, and going back to the conversation we had earlier, sort of which guys can showcase, not only what they put on the film, but like the guys that are also like, look, I have these plus traits, what about Hutchinson and Thibodeau and Ojabo and Trayvon Walker and Boye Mafe and some of these guys that are expected to test really well, sort of what they can do to sort of separate themselves from the rest of the pack and potentially, maybe leapfrog some guys a spot or two up on the sort of pecking order there. So, I'm very curious to see how all those guys wind up testing. And, for the record, like I'm not an anti-Ojabo guy.
No. But I think me and you talked about scheme. I think maybe you thought Trevon Walker was and not to say Trevon Walker's not a good scheme fit. I do. I just think the upside of Ojabo intrigues me more than the upside of Trevon Walker. And I think that's where our disconnect was.
I think Ojabo's an easy projection, I think, right? In the Falcon scheme. You can see it very easily. I think Walker, it's a little bit harder to make that sort of clean projection just because of how he was used at Georgia.
That went back to where we were on. You were there with me on DeMarvin Leal, but I don't know if Trevon Walker's a 5-tech or if he's an outside linebacker. Like I feel like he can be an outside linebacker, but I haven't seen consistent reps of him threatening an offensive tackle like consistently, like properly. His pass rush plan's very muddy. His tempo of his pass rushes, and that's what I mean. Like that kind of thing. For people to say like he's a top 5 prospect, like that gets really bold for me. I could see him as a top 15 prospect, and he's an elite run defender coming out like right away. Like he fills gaps. He takes precedence in like absolutely destroying an offensive lineman. But when it comes to the pass, I feel like he wants to know what he wants to do, but he just doesn't do it. You can develop that over time. But I feel like the thing with Ojabo is like his pass rush you can see in waves, right? He's 2 years, like people forget he's 2 years into being an edge rusher, and he's already got he's crafting that spin move, something that me and you talked about. He threatens upfield and offensive tackle. His ability to flatten is what really got me with Ojabo. Like the second he bends, his balance and then his ability to stay balanced, and I think that's where you've said he gets pushed off a little bit, but he's still able to hold his functional strength to bend around and flatten to the quarterback. So I think I just think his pass, like I could probably teach you if you're willing enough to be a run defender. I can probably teach you to be a run defender. I just think it gets really, really hard to translate a guy who doesn't really work his hands too well in college and then be like, hey man, we're gonna teach you the art of this thing. And I think it's tough, but I like Trevon Walker a good amount. I just think he's more of a run stuffer. I'm not gonna value that at 10, like, you know what I mean, or 8 or 5. Definitely not top 5, and definitely not over Thibodeau. That was one that I seen, and I'm just like, I think Brugler had that. And I'm just like, I don't know what we're doing. I don't know what we're doing here, man. Like, I don't know why we're overthinking Thibodeau. I hope he does. I hope we do. And then we get this polarizing edge prospect. But like you said, that's probably not going to give us 10 sacks the first year. But be like you said as well, like yesterday, one of the probably more dynamic edge prospects that we've drafted over the past, 15, 20 years. Like, he'd be exciting.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. Just the hype that will be on Thibodeau if he gets picked by the Falcons. So we will cross that bridge when we get to it, if we get to it. But Adam, I appreciate you joining me on today's Locked On Falcons and sharing your insights. I look forward to, as we get further along in this process, and we maybe can whittle down some of these players and some of these names and be like, oh, that guy ran a 4.6, he sucks, get him out of here. And so we'll see what happens further along in this process, and I look forward to future conversations. I look forward to completely messing up your future spaces when derailing some of those conversations by talking trash about the Georgia players that you're afraid to do. So we'll see how that goes. But go ahead and plug where people can find your stuff, and if they want to get in on those future spaces, where they can find you on Twitter and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm working a little bit with ATB Falcons, up and coming little sports site. It's really good. We're taking off, and also I'm on at Falcons Nest Pod with a couple guys, Hunter and Andy and Luke and stuff on Twitter. I mean, if you follow this podcast, you probably know those guys too. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Damsky32. I just kind of like randomly throw them out and invite people, and then people come, and then it's a good time. So we had Chuck Smith in there a couple of weeks ago. You missed that one. We had Damian Parsons from the Draft Network. It's good, man. It's like, if you're trying to look in full scope at prospects, it's a good little thing, and we try to stick it to the draft. Never stays there. Always ends up back at 2016 in the Falcons Super Bowl woes, like as every single conversation, or what should we do with Matt Ryan? But we try to steer it in the draft, and hopefully we can consistently do it as the combine goes on.
Look, I've told people before in the past. I've been on various podcasts with other Falcon fans, and you get multiple Falcon fans in the same room, it will always turn to the misery and the years of ineptitude and whatnot. So that's just the way it goes when Falcon fans get together.
I just can't do it anymore. I can't talk about 20 after the game. Like, I had a week where I was like crying, eating ice cream. You know what I mean? And figuring it out there. After that, I can't do it no more. I can't sulk no more.
There you go. So guys, check out Adam's stuff. And he does a lot more draft stuff than I personally do. So definitely worth a follow for you guys to get some insight on some of these prospects. And he does a great job breaking down sort of what he values in his evaluation process to sort of get a full picture on that. So go check him out. And again, want to thank everybody for making Locked On Falcons their first listen. Why not check out the Locked On NFL podcast here on YouTube or elsewhere to get the insights all around the league and all the things going on elsewhere in the NFL besides the Falcons. And of course, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, where Ryan Tracy and Eric Crocker are giving you the breakdown on all the top prospects, going through their positional rankings, all that sort of stuff to get you guys geared up for next week's combine in this entire process. Again, you can find Locked On NFL Draft on the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode. Don't know what we're going to do on tomorrow's episode. I'll figure it out. I always do. And so make sure, if you want to provide some feedback to anything we discussed on today's episode, or anything you want us discuss on future episodes, and by all means, you can hit me up at Locked On Falcons on Twitter or Facebook, as well as send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or of course you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, and make sure you give us a like when you do. So guys, that's going to do it for us. Appreciate it. Till then.